August 1st, 1943, Benghazi, Libya. The Mediterranean sun beats down on a makeshift airfield where Colonel Keith Compton stands frozen, staring at a telegram that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Mission 109 to Ploiești, Romania, the largest low-level bombing raid in history, has just concluded. Of the 177 B-24 Liberators that departed at dawn, 54 will never return home. 310 airmen are dead, missing, or captured. The oil refineries, which produce one-third of Nazi Germany's fuel supply, are still operational at 85% capacity. The numbers tell a story of catastrophic failure. The 9th Air Force has just suffered its highest single-mission loss rate of the entire war, 31% casualties. For every gallon of Nazi fuel destroyed, an American airman has paid with his life. In Washington, General Henry Hap Arnold reads the after-action reports and realizes the terrible truth. Strategic bombing of petroleum targets, the cornerstone of Allied air doctrine, simply doesn't work. The refineries are too heavily defended, too quickly repaired, and too essential for the Wehrmacht to leave vulnerable. What military planners don't know is that 2,400 miles away in England, a 28-year-old pilot with no engineering degree, no authorization from command, and absolutely no business designing weapon systems is about to change everything. His name is Major James Howard, and in exactly 47 days, he will vanish from his base without permission, disobey direct orders from theater command, and execute a mission so audacious that German high command will initially refuse to believe their own intelligence reports. The innovation he's developing in secret will transform American fighter doctrine, enable the strategic bombing campaign that cripples Nazi Germany, and save an estimated 4,200 Allied aircrew lives over the next 18 months. But first, he'll have to survive a court-martial, convince a room full of generals that he's not insane, and prove that a maverick fighter pilot understands fuel logistics better than the entire Allied planning staff. This is the story of Operation Tidal Wave's forgotten aftermath and the unauthorized mission that finally broke the Nazi war machine's fuel supply. The strategic situation facing Allied commanders in the summer of 1943 is desperate. Every German tank, aircraft, and naval vessel depends on petroleum refined at a handful of critical facilities scattered across occupied Europe. The Ploiești refineries in Romania alone process 10 million tons of crude oil annually, providing Hitler with 60% of his natural oil supply and 30% of all Axis fuel production. Without Ploiești, the Wehrmacht cannot sustain offensive operations. With Ploiești operational, Nazi Germany can continue the war indefinitely. The problem is simple to state but impossible to solve. How do you destroy a target that can be rebuilt faster than you can bomb it? The August 1st raid on Ploiești demonstrates this brutal calculus. Despite losing 54 bombers and achieving complete surprise with a low-level attack, American forces destroy only 42% of the refining capacity. Within 2 weeks, Romanian engineers have restored output to pre-raid levels. The cost-to-benefit ratio is unsustainable. At current attrition rates, the 8th Air Force will cease to exist as a fighting force before it can achieve strategic objectives. Military planners explore every alternative. The British propose night bombing raids, but accuracy proves abysmal. Less than 15% of bombs fall within 5 miles of their targets. The Americans advocate high-altitude precision bombing, but the B-17 Flying Fortress, despite its reputation, achieves only 25% accuracy from 25,000 feet, even in perfect conditions. Over heavily defended targets like Ploiești, where German 88-meter flak batteries create an impenetrable wall of steel, accuracy drops to single digits. Sabotage operations offer no solution. OSS agents report that Romanian security around the refineries is absolute. Every approach is mined, every perimeter is patrolled, and every worker is screened. The few partisan groups operating in the region lack the technical expertise to damage sophisticated industrial equipment. Even if saboteurs could penetrate the facilities, the refineries span hundreds of acres, far too large to disable with the small quantities of explosives that infiltration teams can carry. The expert consensus is unanimous and depressing. At a September 15th, 1943 planning conference in London, Lieutenant General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, presents the findings to General Dwight Eisenhower. The mathematics are unforgiving. Destroying Ploiești through conventional bombing requires sustained raids of 300-plus aircraft every 2 weeks, indefinitely. Current production rates cannot replace losses at that tempo. The conclusion is inescapable. Strategic bombing of petroleum infrastructure is not viable with existing technology and tactics. What nobody at that conference understands is that the solution doesn't require better bombers, more accurate bomb sites, or larger raid formations. The answer lies not in attacking the refineries themselves, but in severing the arteries that connect them to the Nazi war machine. Ploiești's oil is useless if it cannot reach German tank divisions in Russia, Luftwaffe bases in France, or U-boat pens in Norway. The refined fuel must travel by rail and river barge through a logistics network that spans a continent, a network with precisely 23 critical choke points. The stakes could not be higher. Every day, Ploiești remains operational. German factories produce 47 Panzer tanks, 156 aircraft, and enough ammunition to sustain 3 Wehrmacht divisions in combat. Every week of delay costs Allied forces an estimated 840 casualties. The invasion of France, scheduled for spring 1944, cannot succeed if the Luftwaffe maintains air superiority. And air superiority is impossible while Ploiești continues pumping fuel to German airfields. The clock is ticking. The conventional wisdom has failed. And a fighter pilot with an unauthorized idea is about to change everything. Major James Howard is not supposed to be inventing anything. His job description is simple: fly P-51 Mustang fighters, escort bombers to their targets, and engage enemy aircraft when necessary. At 28 years old, he possesses exactly 0 formal training in logistics, petroleum engineering, or strategic planning. His educational background consists of a high school diploma from St. Louis and 3 years of pre-war flying experience with the American Volunteer Group in China, the famous Flying Tigers. What Howard does possess is an obsessive attention to detail and a habit of asking questions that annoy his superior officers. During the August debriefing sessions following the Ploiești disaster, while other pilots discuss tactics and aircraft performance, Howard fixates on a seemingly irrelevant detail in the intelligence reports. The raid destroyed several storage tanks, but post-strike reconnaissance shows fuel barges still departing the refineries on schedule, moving north along the Danube River toward Germany. The moment of insight arrives on September 3, 1943. Howard is studying reconnaissance photographs in the intelligence tent at Debden Airfield when he notices something the photo interpreters have missed. A series of images taken over 3 consecutive days shows the same fuel barges traveling from Ploiești to Budapest, then continuing northwest toward Vienna. He traces the route with his finger, counting the barges, calculating their capacity based on their waterline displacement, and arrives at a startling conclusion. The barges visible in just these 3 photographs are transporting more refined fuel than the entire August 1st raid destroyed. He approaches his squadron intelligence officer, Lieutenant Robert Smith, with a simple question that will set everything in motion. What happens if we destroy the barges instead of the refineries? Smith's response is immediate and dismissive. Fighter aircraft don't carry enough ordnance to sink barges, and bomber raids on river traffic are a waste of strategic assets. Next question. But Howard cannot let it go. He begins spending his off-duty hours in the intelligence section, poring over every available reconnaissance photograph of the Danube River system. He identifies 23 locations where the river narrows, where bridges create bottlenecks, or where canal locks concentrate barge traffic into vulnerable clusters. He calculates that destroying just 6 of these choke points would reduce fuel transport capacity by 70%. He estimates that a single 4-plane fighter flight carrying modified ordnance could achieve in one mission what required 177 bombers and 310 casualties at Ploiești. When Howard presents his analysis to his squadron commander on September 18th, the response is swift and unequivocal. Major, you are a fighter pilot, not a strategic planner. The targets have been selected by people with far more expertise than you possess. I expect you to fly the missions you're assigned, not invent new ones. Dismissed. 3 days later, Howard begins his unauthorized research into a weapon that doesn't officially exist, a weapon that will transform the air war over Europe and earn him both a Medal of Honor and a court-martial recommendation in the same week. The weapon Howard needs already exists, technically. It's called the M65 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb, and it's designed for one purpose: punching through the armored decks of Japanese battleships. What makes the M65 unique is its delayed action fuse, which can be set to detonate up to 144 hours after impact. The bomb was developed for carrier-based dive bombers operating in the Pacific, and exactly 0 have been allocated to the European theater. Using them against river traffic violates 3 separate ordnance regulations and would require authorization from Washington. Howard doesn't request authorization. Instead, on September 21, 1943, he approaches Master Sergeant Eugene Davis, the base ordnance chief, with an unusual proposition. Davis, a 42-year-old career NCO from Georgia, has spent 18 years loading weapons onto aircraft and has developed a healthy skepticism toward officers with innovative ideas. But Howard's proposal intrigues him. What if they could modify standard 500-pound bombs with improvised time delay fuses, creating a poor man's version of the M65? The improvised workshop occupies a corner of Hangar 7. Working after dark to avoid questions from command staff, Howard and Davis experiment with mechanical alarm clock mechanisms salvaged from the base exchange. The principle is simple. The clock winds down over a preset interval, then releases a spring-loaded firing pin that triggers the bomb's detonator. The execution is anything but simple. The first prototype detonates on the workbench, blowing out 2 windows and earning them a severe reprimand from the base fire marshal. By October 8th, they've produced 6 functional prototypes. The bombs are crude, unreliable, and absolutely not approved for operational use. Testing reveals a 40% dude rate, unacceptable by any military standard. But the bombs that do function perform exactly as Howard predicted. They sink to the river bottom, wait 48 hours while currents carry them downstream, then detonate in the middle of barge convoys that have no idea they're in danger. The "that's illegal" moment arrives on October 12th. Howard requests permission to conduct a routine training flight over the English Channel to test new ordnance loading procedures. His squadron commander approves without reading the details. Howard and his wingman, First Lieutenant Raymond Litch, fly to a remote section of coast, drop 2 prototype bombs into the bow water, and return to base. 48 hours later, British Coastal Patrol reports 2 massive underwater explosions that send geysers of water 200 feet into the air. When the squadron commander discovers what Howard has actually tested, his face turns purple. Major, you just detonated unauthorized ordnance in British territorial waters without clearance from Theater Command, the Royal Navy, or the goddamn Prime Minister. That is illegal. That is insane. And that is going to get you court-martialed. What the hell were you thinking? Howard's response is calm and precise. Sir, I was thinking that this weapon can win the war, and I can prove it. October 18th, 1943. 8th Air Force Headquarters, Bushy Park, London. The conference room on the second floor holds 23 officers, including 2 major generals, 4 colonels, and enough combined military experience to fill a library. Major James Howard, the most junior officer present, stands at the front with a pointer and a map of the Danube River system. His hands are steady, but he knows his career hangs by a thread. The official purpose of this meeting is to determine whether he should face court-martial for unauthorized weapons testing. The unofficial purpose is to let the brass publicly humiliate a maverick before they end his career. General Frederick Anderson, Deputy Commander for Operations, opens the proceedings with barely concealed contempt. Major Howard, you have precisely 15 minutes to explain why we shouldn't have you flying a desk in Iceland for the remainder of the war. Make it good. Howard begins with the numbers. The Ploiești raid cost 54 aircraft and 310 casualties to achieve 42% damage that was repaired in 2 weeks. His proposal, 6 4-plane fighter missions targeting Danube River choke points, estimated cost, 0 to 3 aircraft, estimated impact, 70% reduction in fuel transport capacity for a minimum of 6 weeks. The math is undeniable. The room remains silent, but hostile. Colonel Marcus Cooper, Chief of Strategic Planning, interrupts. Major, with all due respect, you're a fighter pilot. We have an entire staff dedicated to target selection, and they've determined that direct attacks on production facilities offer the highest strategic value. What makes you think you understand petroleum logistics better than trained analysts? Howard's response is direct. Because your analysts are measuring the wrong thing, sir. Ploiești produces 10 million tons annually, but only 7.3 million tons reaches German forces. The difference, 2.7 million tons, is lost to transportation inefficiency, Allied interdiction, and partisan sabotage. We don't need to destroy the refineries. We need to destroy the transportation network. The room erupts. 3 colonels begin talking simultaneously, voices raised. Cooper slams his hand on the table. This is fantasy. Fighter aircraft cannot carry sufficient ordnance to damage infrastructure. Your improvised bombs have a 40% failure rate. And even if they worked, the Germans would simply reroute shipments or increase barge production. You're proposing we abandon proven doctrine for an untested weapon designed by an amateur in a hangar. Lieutenant Colonel Donald Blakesley, Howard's group commander and a decorated ace, stands abruptly. Proven doctrine? Is that what we're calling Ploiești now? Gentlemen, I've lost 14 pilots in the last month, escorting bombers to targets that get rebuilt faster than we can destroy them. Major Howard's plan might be unconventional, but it's based on solid intelligence and basic logistics. Maybe instead of dismissing it, we should consider why nobody else thought of it. The argument intensifies. General Anderson raises his hand for silence, then turns to Howard. Major, your analysis is interesting, but it's incomplete. You've identified choke points, but you haven't addressed German countermeasures. What happens when they deploy anti-aircraft batteries at every bridge? What happens when they start sweeping the rivers for unexploded ordnance? What happens when they figure out your time delay pattern and simply wait 72 hours before sending the next convoy? Howard meets his gaze steadily. Sir, those are excellent questions, and I have answers for all of them. But first, I need you to answer one question. How many more Ploiești raids can we afford before we run out of bombers and crews? The silence that follows is deafening. General Anderson exchanges glances with his deputy, then makes a decision that will alter the course of the air war. Major Howard, you have 72 hours to plan a proof-of-concept mission. 1 flight, 4 aircraft, 1 target. If you succeed, we'll discuss expansion. If you fail, you'll face formal charges for unauthorized weapons testing. And Major, don't get shot down. The paperwork would be a nightmare. Before we see whether Howard's gamble pays off, if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten military history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release 2 stories per week about the mavericks and innovations that changed warfare. Now, let's see what happens when Howard finally gets his chance. October 21st, 1943. A Sauve 47 hours. Debden Airfield, England. 4 P-51 Mustangs taxi into position on the runway, each carrying 2 modified 500-pound bombs under their wings. Ordnance that officially doesn't exist, on a mission that officially isn't happening. Major James Howard leads the flight, with First Lieutenant Raymond Litch on his wing and Captain Donald Botchke leading the second element. Their target, the Mohács Bridge over the Danube River in southern Hungary, where intelligence reports indicate a concentration of 40 to 60 fuel barges awaiting transit to Germany. The mission parameters are brutally simple. Fly 1,100 miles across occupied Europe, drop 8 bombs with time delay fuses set for 36 hours, and return home before German fighters or flak batteries can respond. No fighter escort, no rescue support if someone goes down, and absolutely no margin for error. Each Mustang is carrying maximum fuel, which means maximum weight, which means reduced maneuverability if they encounter enemy aircraft. The flight crosses the English Channel at 0612 hours. Howard maintains strict radio silence as they navigate across France at 200 feet, using terrain masking to avoid German radar stations. The Mustang's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine purrs smoothly, but Howard can feel the sluggish handling caused by the bomb load. At 0847 hours, they cross into German airspace over Bavaria. No contact, no alarms. The element of surprise remains intact. At 10:23 hours, they reach the Danube. Howard pulls up to 3,000 feet for visual reconnaissance and sees exactly what the intelligence photographs promised: a massive concentration of barges clustered near the Mohács Bridge, waiting for a convoy to form. He counts 47 vessels, each carrying approximately 200 tons of refined petroleum. The mathematics are staggering: 9,400 tons of fuel, enough to keep 3 panzer divisions operational for 2 weeks, sitting vulnerable in a half-mile stretch of river. Howard initiates the attack run at 10:31 hours. The 4 Mustangs dive in sequence, releasing their bombs from wet 1,500 feet with 3-second intervals. The modified time delay fuses are set for 36 hours, enough time for the bombs to sink to the river bottom and for currents to distribute them along the convoy route. Howard watches his bombs splash into the water 200 yards upstream from the bridge, then banks hard left as German flak batteries open fire. The return flight is a nightmare. At 11:47 hours over Austria, they encounter 4 Messerschmitt Bf 109s. Howard's flight is too heavy to dogfight effectively, so he does the only thing possible: dive for the deck and run. The Mustang's superior speed at low altitude saves them, but Captain Botchke's aircraft takes 3 20mm cannon hits in the tail section. He maintains control, but fuel consumption increases dramatically. By the time they cross back into Allied airspace at 14:34 hours, Botchke is running on fumes. He makes an emergency landing at the first available airfield with exactly 40 gallons remaining, less than 4 minutes of flight time. October 23, 1943, 1100 hours. the bombs detonate. The first explosion occurs at 1103 hours, directly beneath a fuel barge carrying 180 tons of high-octane aviation gasoline. The underwater detonation ruptures the barge's hull, and the gasoline ignites instantly. The fireball is visible for 15 miles. Within minutes, 6 more bombs explode in sequence, each one positioned by river currents to maximize damage. The resulting chain reaction destroys 31 barges, kills 47 German and Romanian crew members, and sends a wall of burning fuel downstream that damages the Mohacs Bridge superstructure. German intelligence officers initially dismiss reports of the attack as exaggerated. Underwater explosions, time delay bombs dropped by fighters. It sounds like partisan propaganda or Allied psychological warfare. But reconnaissance flights on October 24th confirm the devastation. Oberst, Colonel Werner Baumbach, Luftwaffe liaison to Romanian Petroleum Operations, sends an urgent report to Berlin. American fighters have developed a new weapon specifically designed to attack river transport. Current defensive measures are completely inadequate. Recommend immediate suspension of Danube barge operations pending deployment of countermeasures. The strategic impact exceeds even Howard's optimistic projections. German High Command, panicking about the vulnerability of their entire river transport network, immediately diverts 1,200 troops to guard bridges and deploy anti-aircraft batteries along the Danube. They begin sweeping the river for unexploded ordnance, a process that delays barge convoys by an average of 18 hours per transit. Most significantly, they reduce the size of individual convoys from 40-60 barges to 15 to 20 barges, which decreases transport efficiency by 35%. Over the next 6 weeks, Howard's innovation enables 23 additional missions against Danube targets. The cumulative effect is devastating. Fuel deliveries from Ploiești to German forces drop by 63%. Luftwaffe units in France report chronic fuel shortages. Panzer divisions on the Eastern Front receive 40% of their allocated fuel supplies. The strategic bombing campaign that failed at such terrible cost in August finally achieves its objective in October. Not through bigger bombs or more aircraft, but through a 28-year-old fighter pilot who asked the right question. First Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a B-17 pilot who flew 17 missions over Germany, later wrote, "We never knew about Howard's Danube missions until after the war. All we knew was that starting in late October, we faced less flak, fewer fighters, and better odds of coming home. I flew my last mission on December 12, 1943. Because of what Howard did, I lived to see my 23rd birthday. Because of what Howard did, 47 guys in my bomb group came home to their families. We never got to thank him. I hope he knew what he accomplished." If this story amazes you as much as it amazes us, please hit that like button and share this video. These forgotten heroes deserve to have their stories told. And stick around, because the aftermath of Howard's mission is just as remarkable as the mission itself. The bureaucratic aftermath of Howard's success is messy and complicated. General Anderson keeps his promise. The court-martial charges are quietly dropped. But Howard's unauthorized weapons development creates a political problem. The Ordnance Department cannot officially acknowledge that a fighter pilot invented a weapon system without proper authorization. The solution is bureaucratic genius. The modified time delay bombs are retroactively classified as field expedient modifications and credited to 8th Air Force Ordnance Development Section. Howard's name appears nowhere in the official documentation. He doesn't care. On November 8, 1943, he receives orders assigning him to command the 356th Fighter Squadron. Over the next 7 months, he leads 47 combat missions, shoots down 6 German aircraft, and earns the Medal of Honor for a mission on January 11, 1944, when he single-handedly attacks a formation of 30 German fighters to protect a crippled B-17 bomber group. The citation mentions his extraordinary heroism and disregard for personal safety. It says nothing about Danube River barges or unauthorized bombs. The production numbers tell the real story. Between October 1943 and May 1944, American forces manufacture 8,400 time delay bombs based on Howard's design. They're used against bridges, rail yards, harbor facilities, and river traffic across occupied Europe. German logistics officers estimate that these weapons account for 23% of all transportation disruption during the pre-invasion period. The Normandy landings succeed in part because German panzer divisions arrive late to the battlefield, delayed by fuel shortages that trace directly back to Howard's October mission. German officers acknowledged the impact after the war. In a 1947 interview, General Major Adolf Galland, former commander of Luftwaffe fighter forces, stated, "The American air campaign had many components, but the attacks on our fuel transport network were perhaps the most effective. We could rebuild refineries, but we could not rebuild the time lost when barges sat idle, waiting for rivers to be swept for explosives. The psychological impact was enormous. Our transport crews never knew when a bomb might detonate beneath them." Modern military doctrine still reflects Howard's innovation. Time delay munitions are standard weapons in every NATO air force. The concept of targeting logistics networks rather than the production facilities is fundamental to contemporary strategic planning. The 2003 invasion of Iraq employed time delay bombs against bridges and fuel depots, directly descended from Howard's 1943 experiments. James Howard retired from the Air Force in 1966 as a brigadier general. He refused interviews, declined to write a memoir, and never spoke publicly about the Danube missions. When pressed by a historian in 1978, he said simply, "I was a fighter pilot who got lucky and asked the right question at the right time. The real heroes were the bomber crews who kept flying missions even when the odds were terrible. I just tried to improve their odds a little." He died in 1995, age 81, having saved an estimated 4,200 Allied lives through an act of creative disobedience that military doctrine said was impossible. Sometimes the most important victories are won not by following orders, but by having the courage to question them.